I'm Evan Smith, the CEO of the Texas Tribune. On behalf of my colleagues at the Trib, I want to welcome you to this year's Texas Tribune Festival. Every one of our 11 years in business, the work of our nonprofit newsroom has been critically important, but never more than in 2020. We produce reliable, credible reporting on the issues that affect everyday Texans, making them better informed and motivating them to participate civically. You and people like you, readers, supporters, attendees at our events, make our public service journalism possible. If you value what we do, now is a great time to support us. Every dollar you donate, up to $20,000 by September 30th, will be matched by the Lowy Law Firm in Austin, and they'll give another $20,000 to the Central Texas Food Bank. Learn more and contribute today at texastribune.org/give. Now on with the show. I hope you enjoy this conversation, programmed in partnership with our friends at MSNBC, between former U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and Joy Reid, MSNBC anchor and the host of the ReidOut.
Hello, everyone. I'm Joy Reid, host of MSNBC's The ReidOut. And this conversation is part of a partnership between MSNBC and the Texas Tribune Festival, the all-you-can-stream virtual event that's happening all September long. And today, I'm so pleased that my guest is Hillary Rodham Clinton, former First Lady of the United States, former Secretary of State, the nominee for President of the United States in 2016, and somebody that I'm always so excited to talk with. Secretary Clinton, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Joy. It's great to talk to you again.
Absolutely. Well, let's just get started because we are in a very difficult time, obviously. First of all, given the fact that we just lost the great Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Justice of the Supreme Court, who's been called the Thurgood Marshall of women's rights, give me your reflections on her.
Well, I think all of the accolades that we've been hearing have really done her a good service by looking at, number one, her leading legal career when she was a lawyer with the ACLU, bringing cases that certainly affected my life. You know, I couldn't get a credit card when I was a young woman on my own. There were so many things that disadvantaged women. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg was in the forefront of eliminating those barriers and trying to create equality under the law for everyone. And of course, when she served on the Court of Appeals, she was equally strong and forward-leaning in continuing to push the legal and constitutional limits. When my husband was president and he had a vacancy on the court, I suggested he look at then Judge Ruth Bader Ginsburg because I thought she brought not only the legal experience and what she stood for, but she'd been a circuit court judge. And once he met with her, he agreed that she would be perfect for the court. And I think both he and I, and maybe Ruth as well, were a little surprised that she became a cultural pop icon as well as a great lawyer and justice. But her loss is felt deeply because she did push the limits of justice in the right direction toward, that more perfect union that we should all be striving to achieve.
Yeah. I mean, and you, I think of you in the same category, honestly, Secretary Clinton. I mean, you have been a public figure in a sense since you gave that Wellesley graduation speech and got on the cover of Time magazine. And there has been a laser focus on you in a negative sense from Republicans, I feel almost your entire life, right? You've spent all of these decades fighting against a very determined, very male opposition to you achieving your potential. But you still managed to become a United States Senator. You still managed to become Secretary of State. You still managed to be the first woman to get the nomination as a woman, in a major presidential ticket, or the second woman, or the first woman to be the nominee. You've managed to do all of that despite all those fights. And I feel like Ruth Bader Ginsburg really is in the same vein. Right. And having that fight is part of the journey, I think, for women. I know it is for women of color. I know it was for my mom. So can you talk a little bit in this moment when losing Ruth Bader Ginsburg has left a lot of people, frankly, depressed. Can you talk a little bit about the other side of that? But I mean, the other side of that is resiliency, because there had to have been something in her. There had to have been something in you to keep that fight going, regardless of how vicious it got, regardless of how hard it got. Can you just talk a little bit for folks about resiliency?
You know, I love your phrase, Joy. Having the fight is part of the journey. And it is, for me, all about what I can do to help make life better for somebody else. And Ruth was very explicit about that. She used her legal talent, her smarts, her hard work, determination to try to make life fairer and better for all people, women and men. And I think if you're fighting for something other than yourself or your own ambition, you can keep going, because the setbacks are serious, but they're not as personal as ones if you're putting it on the line just for a personal reason. So whenever I got pushed back, like back in the early 90s when I was working hard for quality, affordable health care for everybody, we did not succeed. But I figured, okay, what can we do instead? And that's when we began to work to get the Children's Health Insurance Program through. And I think Ruth was the same way. She made as much progress as she could. She won some cases, she lost some cases, but she would regroup. And you're right, it was a sense of resilience, but resilience, of course, on behalf of yourself getting up and going on, but also on behalf of the cause larger than yourself. You mentioned Thurgood Marshall, same kind of leader, constantly looking how you push the envelope to advance racial justice and equality. And if you're doing that in the larger context of American history, you've got to keep going, because the work is never finished.
Yeah. And, so, and I'm going to move on to broader topics, but just to stay just for one more question on the courts, what advice would you give Democrats? Democrats are right now having this whole battle in their minds, a sort of mental challenge of, well, what do you do? Right. On the one hand, there's defeat everyone who's going to vote for the next nominee from the president. On the other hand, focus on expanding the court after the fact, or adding DC statehood or Puerto Rico statehood. There are all of these options. What option would you advise Democrats to take right now, or what options?
Well, Joy, I think first we have to be sure we clearly define what the fight is. And ultimately, this fight, it seems to me, is about healthcare. Remember, healthcare is literally before the court. Trump and the Republicans, led by Mitch McConnell, have been trying to get rid of health care for years, ever since President Obama passed the Affordable Care Act. For reasons that escape me, they want to strip away the rights of people with pre-existing conditions, about 130 million Americans, from getting affordable health care. They want to totally take away the coverage for 22 million Americans who get their health care through the Affordable Care Act. They want to take away all the protections that were passed by the Congress, like being 26 and still being able to stay on your parents' policy, and the list goes on. So let's be sure we understand that what the Republicans are doing is rushing an appointment to the court to repeal the Affordable Care Act and strip away health care from many millions of Americans. There is no mistake about that. There are other issues that we'll look at down the road, but right now, the Democrats need to make that case. And then the second case, which dovetails with it, has to do with COVID-19. A lot of people are coming out of their experiences with COVID. We've lost 200,000, but we've had many, many more who've actually suffered and survived. They're coming out with pre-existing conditions. Yes. And they will not be eligible for affordable health care if the Affordable Care Act is stripped away. So not only are the Republicans in the Senate refusing to pass the bill, passed on a bipartisan basis in the House, to provide more unemployment help for unemployed Americans, to provide more help for state and local governments who are bearing all the burden. They're not even helping to deal with the impact of the virus. they're also making it increasingly difficult for people who had that virus, who are still suffering from some kind of exhaustion, I've heard, some heart problems, I've heard, brain fogginess, I've heard, whatever it might be. It will now be a pre-existing condition. This could not be more diabolical. And I think that Democrats need to be absolutely clear at the federal level in this fight with McConnell and Trump, but also in the Senate races, that any vote for any Republican is literally a vote to cost you money, to make your health care more expensive, and maybe to eliminate the possibility you'll be able to afford it at all.
You know, that is the first time I've heard it framed that way. Wow. And when you really think about it, I mean, we just crossed this milestone, this devastating milestone of 200,000 Americans dead. It's very difficult for me to even report on it every day as we've gotten closer and closer to it. This scale of death, which is more people than died in combat in World War II. I think we've hit the World War I. I think we've also hit the World War II combat number as well. We're losing people at 1,000 a day. And yet the Republican Party seems very indifferent to it. They seem to have accepted it. And the president of the United States doesn't even talk about it.
Right.
Well,
he talks about it to diminish it. You know, we haven't quite hit World War II, but we are now more than World War I, and we are certainly more than 9/11. We are on a pathway to exceed World War II, which would be beyond tragic. Which would be about a little more than doubling of the 200,000 that we've lost. And this president and his Republican enablers try to diminish that. He did it again in a rally in the last day or so, saying, oh, you know, the only people who die are old people and they're already sick. I mean, first of all, if that were my mother or my father or my grandparent or anybody that I know, I would be deeply offended by diminishing the life of any of our fellow Americans. But of course, it's not true. Younger people have died. Even children have died. This is a really unpredictable virus that we're just beginning to understand, and we're not getting any help from our president or from the Senate Republicans under Mitch McConnell. So I agree with you. It's hard to talk about, but we've got to keep talking about it because we know that this president, through a combination of indifference and incompetence, has actually contributed to a greater loss of life than we needed to have. You know, we've got about 4% of the world's population. We have 20% of the world's deaths. And we know that many experts, and yes, I do listen to experts, are saying that there most likely will in some places be second waves. We're not through this at all. And we saw the same kind of resurgence back during the so-called Spanish flu days, where we ended up losing about 650,000 Americans at a time when we didn't have the quality of health care. We didn't have anything like what we've got now if we were to use it. And back then, there were also arguments about whether to wear masks and what to close down. And so we know that there is still no support from this president to do what needs to be done, despite his own healthcare advisors, people he put into the job, saying, hey, let's wear masks, let's socially distance, let's be careful about reopening too soon. That will really help. And the big fear I think people are now facing, Joy, is trying to take over the vaccine testing regimen, which has been really carefully done in the past. I mean, part of the tragedy here is that the rest of the world looked to the United States about how to deal with healthcare problems, infectious diseases and the like. Our Centers for Disease Control, our FDA, they were the gold standard. And under this president, they have been politicized and diminished. And many people are afraid that he's going to try to rush some vaccine to market for a cheap political point that he thinks could help him in the election, but could set us back dramatically when it comes to the safety and efficacy of any vaccine.
Yeah. And we know that, we have Donald Trump on tape talking to Bob Woodward, admitting that he knew how deadly this virus was. And this was back in February. And yet he has continued to hold these super spreader rallies. He's continued to diminish, as you said, the severity and the dangerousness of this virus, and to mock people who wear masks to try to protect themselves and others. Given that it has not completely cratered his support, there is a base of Americans who support him regardless, even though they know that. They know about things like the bounties that were put on American troops. They know about his denigration of our fallen as being suckers. They know that. And there are millions and millions of Americans who don't care. So I would ask you, as somebody who ran for president yourself, when you look at a Biden potential victory, let's say he wins, how do you unite a country where tens of millions of people don't care that 200,000 people have died and that the president lied about it?
I think this is going to be one of the biggest challenges that a president, Joe Biden, and a vice president, Kamala Harris, will face. And it's really complicated and many layered. I think that the core rock solid support that Trump enjoys is partly almost cult-like, I guess I would say. The people who show up at his rallies, it's like going to, a music festival. You travel from place to place because you get some kind of emotional charge out of, seeing somebody entertain you for an hour or more, insulting and attacking people. It's theater. And so there are, I agree with you, there are millions of Americans who find that emotionally gratifying. And no fact, no evidence, no argument or logic will interrupt that. Only real world experience. So, for example, there have been a number of people who thought that the whole virus was a hoax, and they've come down with it. Or maybe they've lost someone that they loved. I was very touched by the young woman who spoke at the Democratic National Convention, who talked about her father, who was a big Trump supporter, who agreed with Trump that it was a hoax, and then he got it, and sadly he passed away. So reality does intrude into some of the thinking of certain of those folks. But I agree that we've got a bigger problem. One of the big problems we've got is the prevalence of disinformation and misinformation on social media. And now that more we learn about it, this recent film called Social Dilemma, which points out how really we didn't understand it, but a lot of the social media is set up to excite us, incite us, kind of addict us to conspiracies and dark stories that we keep coming back for more. You've got a whole broadcast network, namely Fox, who feeds all that paranoia, who feeds false information to the people who watch, and then all the other outlets in the media, online, radio, and the rest. So it's a bigger problem, Joy, but I think Joe Biden is the really right person because he's a man of compassion and empathy. He will try to reach out to people who did not support him. What a novel idea. He wants to be the president of all the people of our country, not just the people who voted for him. That should be an invitation to people who are starting to question. Maybe they heard the Bob Woodward tapes. I mean, how could you listen to that and not say, hey, that president sacrificed people for his own political advantage. He knew, but he didn't tell us. He even said it was deadly, but he pretended it wasn't. So I think that people are beginning to question, but there will be a hardcore that is left. And it's up to the big majority of Americans to start trying to knit our country back together.
Yeah. One of the issues I think that's going to, it'll live past Trump because it's lived long before him, is police brutality and police violence against people of color, Black and brown people and Indigenous people. We've seen cases like George Floyd bring that right back, and Breonna Taylor. We know there is a decision coming up in the Breonna Taylor case any day now. I don't think a lot of people are very hopeful that it will be a decision that will bring justice to her family. What can be done about this consistent deprivation of equal rights and equal treatment by police that's backed in a lot of ways by something Democrats normally favor, a union. Police unions are incredibly strong. They're incredibly powerful. Do you think that their power should be diminished? And do you think that the 100% liability protection police enjoy should be relaxed?
Well, I think that we need new legislation and regulation. In other words, we need to change the rules by which the police and the unions and public officials and everybody else have to abide. And that's beginning to happen in some places. I have seen city councils, state legislatures passing new laws about impermissible police behavior, like chokeholds, for example. There does have to be greater accountability. So certainly the liability provisions, which are, in many jurisdictions, 100% need to be reined in because there has to be accountability. Joy, I heard an incredibly smart metaphor the other day. I don't know who it is, or I'd give that person credit, was saying, look, you don't have airlines and, airline pilot unions saying, well, yeah, we have some bad apples and occasionally they crash. No, you have tests, you have accountability. You remove people who, through their behavior or other reasons, should not be behind the controls on an airplane. Well, we now know our police need to protect us. I mean, I want police protection. I want police who will protect and serve the communities that they are supposed to be protecting. But we know that there are some people who are either not well trained or whose attitude is, not appropriate, not acceptable. And at some point, there has to be accountability for that. So we're at the beginning of this process. And, look, I think the two extremes where people often, go when something difficult happens, the defund police, get rid of police, we don't need police, or the police can never do any wrong, they can't be held accountable, let them do whatever they want. I mean, no, we live in the real world. And we want real police protection that respects communities and that weeds out people who should not have that very considerable authority. That can be done if we pay attention to what we are hearing from people who are literally on the front lines. And we've gone through too many of these cases. I spoke so much about this in 2016. A lot of people, Joy, said to me, quit talking about it. Don't travel around with the mothers of the movement, mothers whose children had been killed by gun violence or by police action. I said, wait a minute, I'm running to be president to solve problems. I'm running to be president to bring everybody together, and we've got to face this. Well, maybe finally we can do that together.
Yeah. And, speaking of criminal justice, we've just learned in the last 24 hours that Cy Vance in New York, the district attorney there, is very seriously considering potentially charging Donald Trump, potentially with tax fraud. We know that Michael Cohen, who was Donald Trump's lawyer, has testified under oath in Congress and also has said in his book and in interviews with myself and others that Donald Trump did, in fact, lever the value of his properties depending on how he wanted to report it on his taxes and insurance. There is the potential that he could face those charges based not on what he's done as president, but what he did before. During the campaign in 2016, Donald Trump, Rudy Giuliani, and others led lock her up chants against you. And, with a father that came from the Congo, that sat in my spirit as incredibly wicked, because that is what happens in countries that are not democracies, that if you dare to run against the president, you end up in jail. So that was pernicious. But in this case, do you think that prosecutors should hold back from prosecution when it comes to Donald Trump once he's no longer president?
Well, I'm going to leave that to the prosecutors because I have no idea what evidence they have or what kind of case they have. Charging decisions are always ones that demand close scrutiny and the highest degree of professionalism. I can only say that I don't think he should be exempt from the law. You know, back in 2016, I had the great advantage of knowing I'd never done anything wrong that was going to enable them to do this to me. I'd released all my taxes. I had testified whenever I was asked to testify. I had done everything that Donald Trump refuses to do. So you have to ask yourself, what is it he's hiding? And how serious is it? And will this come to light over the next months through investigations by Vance or others? I'll wait to see that, but I have to really underscore what you said, Joy. Look, I didn't like it at all when Trump, Giuliani, and the others were trying to stir up, which sadly they did, a lot of doubts about me because I saw it as a really, cheap political move. And also, as you rightly point out, kind of reminiscent of what is done in authoritarian countries. If you can't beat your opponent, if you need Russia to help you, maybe you can, throw her in jail. And so I am very sensitive to the misuse of the law. So I don't want to jump to a conclusion about what evidence might be available that would be worthy of finding Trump accountable. But I think, a good prosecutor, as Vance is, should follow that evidence and see where it leads.
Yeah. You mentioned Russia. Russia had a hand in you not being president of the United States, despite winning the popular vote by nearly 3 million. I like to remind people of that. So you were the people's choice. But other people weighed in, not only the Electoral College, which a lot of us consider to be thoroughly undemocratic, but also Russia, a hostile foreign power, at least a difficult foreign power for us to deal with. They're at it again. We have heard the reports that they are trying to do the same things to former Vice President Biden that they did to you. I know they particularly disliked you because the Obama administration was tough on them, instituted sanctions when Russia overstepped in Crimea. And so I think they fear probably the same coming from Joe Biden. What can be done? I think one of the frustrating things for a lot of people is that there didn't seem to be much that the federal government, that the Obama administration could do to stop them the first time. What could be done now?
Well, I don't think we fully understood the threat the first time back in 2016. I didn't fully understand it until it was too late. I learned that Russia had stolen emails from the DNC and therefore was peddling stolen materials. Obviously, I learned that they had stolen emails from John Podesta and were peddling those. And we learned later that, the Trump campaign was sharing sensitive polling information with the Russians. And of course, they were a heavy player online, particularly on Facebook, peddling all kinds of misinformation and disinformation. So we didn't have quite the full understanding that we do now. After all the investigations, and I particularly want to point attention to the bipartisan findings of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Nothing has been bipartisan under Donald Trump, but this was, and I think there are 5 volumes. A lot of it is redacted, but enough of it comes through. You have a really good idea. And in the last volume, the Senate Intelligence Committee could not be clearer. Russia weighed in against me. Putin wanted to defeat me. They favored Donald Trump. They were actively on his side. And now here we go. Fast forward 4 years, and we're being told the same thing, that the Russians are involved again, that they are supporting Trump again. Now, perhaps people are more ready for it because fool me once, shame on you, but fool me twice, shame on me. So people are not falling for it online the way they did before. But we're going to have to keep talking about it. People like you and your show, we're going to have to keep informing, educating voters. I wish that the Democratic members of the Senate who have seen the classified information, they come out of these hearings with their hair on fire and then they say, but I can't talk about it because it's classified. I wish there were a way that they could find an opening that wouldn't breach their duties. But the American public deserves to know. I think they deserved to know back in 2016. we finally got John Brennan and Jim Clapper on October 8th to say, hey, the Russians are playing, but it never broke through the way that it needed to. But now this needs to be a constant drumbeat. And it's really a shame that our government is controlled by someone who knows that he owes his first election to Russia and is counting on Russia to help him. And not only in the social media arena, but I increasingly am wondering about our actual election infrastructure. We don't really have the answers there. The Senate committee couldn't get very deep in that because we've never investigated it because our government doesn't want to. So just beware, everybody. Don't let Vladimir Putin choose your next president if you can help it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're recording this on National Voter Registration Day. So I'm sure that you will join me in saying that everyone, the most, the greatest power you have is your own, and that you can get out there and vote. Don't be dissuaded. Don't let voter suppression dissuade you. Get out there and vote. It's your right. People got very close.
The other side is trying to prevent you from voting and preventing you from having your vote counted. So they may know something you don't know about how powerful your vote is.
That's absolutely right. Yes, they wouldn't try to take it from you if they didn't know that it was powerful. Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton, you're part of the three-letter club, RGB, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, RBG, the notorious RBG, but we're going to call you the notorious HRC because you're also a three-letter girl. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you. And thank you so much to the Texas Tribune Festival for making this happen. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.